So today is the last day for the prairie ecosystem, and we're going to talk about the people on the prairie. Now, we learned that humans also live there. The Great Plains is an area of prairie land in the middle of the United States. So this is our country. The prairie is right here, the Great Plains, and we live over here, right over here in New Jersey. The prairie is home to many different Native American tribes, the first people to ever live there. About 150 years ago, more people began moving west to the Great Plains. These people were called pioneers because they were exploring land that was brand new to them. To travel to the Great Plains, pioneers often packed up everything they owned into covered wagons pulled by horses or oxen. Others traveled by stagecoach. Many families traveled together so they could help each other out on the long journey. Now, I don't think I can pack up everything I own and just go to the Great Plains. So on the top, you'll see your covered wagon. So it's covered with a cloth. Then you see your stagecoach, which kind of looks like a horse carriage that we would see in like a carnival today. Many pioneers came from big cities full of houses and shops. So the Great Plains was very different, with a lot of area of grass and flowers and animals like the bison. The people living on the Great Plains had to figure out how to survive, how to meet their needs for shelter, water, and food. Do you think you could build a house on the Great Plains? There weren't many trees on the Great Plains, so shelters couldn't be engineered using a lot of wood because there wasn't a lot of trees. So people had to use the resources that they did have, like dirt and animal skins. Some Native Americans built shelters out of dirt and grass called earth lodges. So this right here is your earth lodge. It's grass and dirt, and that's pretty neat. Others built teepees, stretching animal skin across long branches to create shelters protected from the weather. Now, some of you might have a teepee tent at home, and it's definitely not built out of animal skin. The pioneers used dirt for their shelters too, digging up chunks of soil called sod and stacking them like bricks to build shelters. They often added dirt on the top of the roof so that less heat would escape and the inside would stay warm. That looks like a cool, safe home. Many prairie dwellers built their houses near creeks or streams so they had access to water. But what about the food? Most people didn't have access to grocery stores. They couldn't just go to the corner store like we can. What kind of food do you think the people on the prairie had? The Native Americans and pioneers both hunted bison for food. The bison provided meat, which they hung up to dry so it could last longer. They didn't have refrigerators, so they hung it up so it can last longer, and that's weird. There were more uses for the bison too. The skin and fur was very thick and warm. So naturally, the Native Americans and early pioneers used it for robes and blankets, just like Jack and Annie did in the Ice Age when they found their very thick fur mammoth coats. The rich prairie soil, now we know has a lot of nutrients thanks to the prairie dog, was good for growing food to eat. Native Americans grew corn, beans, and squash, and the pioneers grew wheat to make bread. They raised the cows for meat and milk. So they're really awesome. They came here not knowing what to do or how to survive, and they looked around them and used everything around them to survive. That is brilliant. Not everyone on the Great Plains settled down in one spot, though. Cattle herders, often called cowboys or cowgirls, were needed to bring cattle from the prairie to cities in the east. So they traveled from place to place and didn't have a permanent house to live in or a farm to grow their food. They were constantly moving. They rode long distances on horseback. They needed shelters they could carry with them and set up each night when they stopped to camp out. They also needed food that wouldn't rot or go bad during their journey. And they came up with lots of cool things to survive. Now, I couldn't imagine carrying my home with me everywhere I went. So, this is what they did. The cattle herders ate preserved food like dried beef and stale biscuits, similar to the pirates' hardtack. And just like the moon food, how they sucked out all the water to preserve it for a long time, they kind of did the same thing. That's why they left it there to dry. This kind of food lasts longer than fresh meat and fresh bread. They built simple tents for shelter at night or they just slept under the stars. Now this tent kind of looks like that teepee we talked about earlier. Long days on horseback led cattle herders to engineer new gear so their rides would be easier. So here was their problem. They needed protection from the hot sun or the rain. And here was the solution. They built hats with wide brims to protect their faces from the weather. And we still use hats for the same reason today. The problem that they faced was they needed to carry food and supplies for long distances and for a long time. So the solution was a saddlebag on the side of the horse to store supplies, like we carry our backpacks to carry our books and folders. Another problem was they needed to get on and off the horse. So they created stirrups to get on and off the horse. And you see it's like a bike pedal when you step on your bike pedal to sit on your seat. Another problem was they needed protection from the dust on the trail, kicked up by the horses or the windstorms. So they wore bandanas around their neck and raised to cover the eyes, nose, and mouth. Another thing the cattle herders did to make the long trip easier and more fun was to sing songs along their journey. Now, let's visualize for a second. Imagine you're on the prairie with just two other cattle herders for months at a time, riding your horse, camping at night, and riding more the next day. What do you see? What do you hear? Singing wasn't just for fun, though. It had a very important purpose. Cattle herders didn't want their animals to get scared because if the animals got scared, they might run away. And this is called a stampede when all the animals start running away. So singing songs to the cattle kept the animals calm. We sing songs like lullabies to calm ourselves and others down too, like when we listen to calming music during graphics practice so we can calm down and get our brains ready for math. The cattle herders did the same thing. Along with their voices, so singing, a harmonica was the perfect portable instrument for a traveling cattle herder. So this is a harmonica. When you blow air through the holes of this harmonica, it causes the inside to vibrate and make a sound. So making music was a nice way to relax at the end of the day. Today, the Great Plains looks very different. More people live there now, and there are fewer open plains since people built cities and farms. What do you think happens to the prairie plants and animals when all of these cities are built? They might lose their home. Scientists are working really hard to protect the prairie ecosystem. Huge areas of land, like the American Prairie Reserve, have been set aside to protect the homes of wildlife and plants. And there was a time when the bison were almost extinct. Now, remember that extinct means that every single one of them were dead. They died. But now, because of the scientists were working so hard to protect the prairie, they're not endangered anymore. So they're very much alive and you can still see them today. What do you think these prairie lands will look like 100 years from now? I'm thinking there will be more cities and maybe not that many animals. Let's do our words. We'll count syllables. Native American. Native American. Wow, that was a big one. Great Plains. Great Plains. Earth Lodge. Earth Lodge. Wheat. Wheat. Bison. Bison. Stirrups. Stirrups. Bandana. Bandana. Teepee. Teepee. Covered wagon. Covered wagon. All right, boys and girls, think about the most interesting thing that you learned, and that will be your message. So, what was really cool?